I learned Paul Sadowski's name 3 seconds after my lips touched his. Not before. Before, he was just table 12, the one the maitre d' seated himself, the one where Antoine personally brought water and crystal stemware we didn't use for anyone else, the one that made the sommelier's hand shake just slightly when pouring the Chateau Margaux. Before, he was tailored charcoal wool, platinum cufflinks catching candlelight, and tattoos that crawled from beneath his collar like secrets trying to escape. After, he was the man who could ruin my life with a phone call. Sounds dramatic written out like that. But when you've worked 3 years in fine dining, 2 at Le Couronne, the kind of place where silence costs more than noise, you learn that details aren't just details. They're survival. The way a guest's jaw tightens when you pour from the wrong side. How quickly a manager appears when certain names hit the reservation book. Which tables get linens pressed twice. That was 3 weeks ago, the first time I saw him. Now it's Friday, 8:47 p.m., and I'm not supposed to be here. Margot called in sick. David's car broke down on the Mass Pike. The espresso machine died mid-service, and someone had to stay late to hand-pour every coffee while Claudette, our manager, made frantic calls to the repair company. That someone was me, because rent is due in 3 days and I've already asked my landlord for extensions twice this year. Because, sorry, I can't, isn't a phrase that pays bills. So I stayed. By the time dinner service hit full stride, I'd been on my feet for 9 hours and developed the kind of tunnel vision that comes from exhaustion and fear. Fear of dropping something, fear of forgetting the modifier on table 7's halibut, fear of the way Claudette's mouth thinned whenever I passed her. I didn't even notice when Paul Sadowski walked in, but the dining room did. The couple at table 4 stopped mid-sentence. The sommelier appeared from the wine cellar like he'd been summoned by a bell only he could hear. And Claudette, who never touched tables herself, personally pulled out his chair at table 12. The one positioned against the far wall with clear sightlines to both entrances, the kitchen, and the street-facing windows. Always table 12, always alone, always watching. I picked up my tray, 2 côtes de bœuf for table 9, a deconstructed bouillabaisse, 3 sides, and started moving. Muscle memory mostly. Weaving between tables in the narrow spaces between conversations about mergers and vacation homes in the vineyard. My feet ached. The tray was heavier than it should have been because I'd loaded it wrong, compensating for a wobble in the left corner that I should have reported but didn't because new trays cost money and Claudette had already cut our tip pool twice this quarter. I was 3 steps from table 9 when the child moved. Not even running, just a kid, maybe 6, bored out of his mind, while his parents argued softly in French about someone named Theo who'd missed a tuition payment. The kid scooted his chair back to look at his phone. Just a normal movement. Just bad timing. The chair leg caught my ankle. Physics took over. The tray tilted. Porcelain sang that high, awful note of something expensive about to shatter. I spun, trying to correct, trying to catch the rim, overcompensated, and collided with table 12. With him. My hands hit his shoulders. My lips brushed his. Not a kiss, not really. Just a millisecond of shocked contact, soft and warm and utterly impossible. The smell of cedar and something darker, bourbon maybe, or smoke. Then gravity finished its work. I stumbled backward. The tray hit the floor. Porcelain exploded across marble like shrapnel. Sauce splattered across my shoes, his table, the hem of some woman's dress 2 tables over. The dining room froze. Not the polite pause when someone drops a fork. Frozen. 60 people holding their breath in unison. Claudette's face drained white. Antoine stood paralyzed mid-pour, wine bottle hovering uselessly. Even the kitchen sounds stopped. No sizzle, no ticket printer, nothing. Paul Sadowski looked at me. Really looked. Not the way men at table 3 had looked earlier, all wandering eyes and entitled smirks. This was assessment, vivisection, like he could see every bad decision I'd ever made laid out in chronological order, including the current one blooming across his $3,000 suit in beurre blanc. I opened my mouth. Most people beg before they touch me. His voice was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that made you lean in even though every instinct screamed to run. You skip the begging. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Around us, the dining room remained a tableau of suspended disaster. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Not a friendly smile, something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the look a predator gives something that surprised it by not running. Have dinner with me tomorrow. It wasn't a question. The thing about working at Le Couronne is that you learn the geography of power fast, or you don't last. Not the obvious kind. Tourists in designer knockoffs who send back wine because they Googled the vintage and want to feel important. Real power. The kind where Claudette herself brings the check. Where we keep table 12 permanently reserved even on our busiest nights. Empty and waiting like a throne. Where Antoine once told me 3 drinks into his own shift drink. There are customers we serve and customers we serve. Learn the difference. I'd learned. I'd watched Marco De Luca, a regular who owned half the commercial properties in the seaport, physically move to a different section when Sadowski entered. Watched a city councilman I'd seen on the news lower his voice mid-argument with his mistress. Watched our head chef, who once made a food critic cry for implying his roulade was competent, personally, bring out course corrections I'd never seen on any menu. Small tells, little shifts in air pressure that added up to a portrait I deliberately chose not to examine too closely, because I needed this job. Needed it the way you need oxygen or rent money or proof that the $48,000 in student loans and the chemistry degree currently gathering dust in my studio apartment hadn't been a complete miscalculation. Uncle Tom, not really my uncle, just my mom's friend who'd worked every restaurant in Boston's North End, got me this position when I was desperate enough to take anything that paid in actual money instead of exposure. He'd looked at my resume, asked if I could carry 3 plates at once without crying, and put me on the floor the next shift. "You're smart enough to be doing something better than this," he'd said. "But smart doesn't pay rent. This does. So do it well, keep your head down, and maybe you'll figure out what comes next." 3 years later, I still hadn't figured out what came next. And now I'd just kissed a man whose last name I'd learned from the whispered warnings of co-workers who wouldn't meet my eyes. "Miss Honer." Claudette's voice cut through the frozen tableau. She'd materialized beside me, her face arranged in an expression I'd never seen before, terror masquerading as professionalism. "Go to the back. Now! I'll handle—" She gestured vaguely at the porcelain massacre spreading across the floor, but Sadowski raised one hand. Just that. A small gesture, barely a movement. Claudette stopped mid-sentence. "Leave her." He hadn't looked away from me. "We're not finished." "Of course, Mr. Sadowski." Claudette's voice had gone airless. "Whatever you need." She retreated. Antoine unfroze and began moving again, snapping his fingers at the busser. Slowly, conversation resumed. Muted, cautious. Everyone pretending not to watch table 12 while watching nothing else. Sadowski stood. Moved with the kind of controlled grace that suggested violence and discipline in equal measure. Pulled a card from his inner jacket pocket, heavy stock, cream-colored, minimal text. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. He held it out. I took it. My hands were shaking. The card read only an address and a single word. Penthouse. I don't... My voice cracked. I don't understand. You will. He stepped past me, close enough that I smelled cedar again, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough to hear him murmur, so quietly that no one else could possibly hear. Wear something that isn't covered in my dinner. Then he was gone. The front door opened, closed. A car engine purred to life outside, expensive, German, the kind that cost more than I'd make in 5 years. I stood there holding his card, surrounded by broken porcelain and my coworkers' horrified stares, and realized 3 things simultaneously. 1. I'd just kissed Paul Sadowski. 2. Everyone in this room knew exactly who he was except me. And 3. I was about to find out. That night I Googled his name. I wish I hadn't. What do you think Denise found? Comment below. I Googled Paul Sadowski at 2:47 a.m., sitting on my apartment floor with my laptop balanced on a stack of unpaid bills. The search returned 847 results. None of them good. Boston businessman under investigation for racketeering. Charges dropped. 3 hospitalized after altercation at Sadowski-owned nightclub. No arrests made. City councilman denies allegations of ties to Sadowski organization. And then, buried on page 3, a single photograph from a charity gala 5 years ago. Sadowski in a tuxedo, half turned from the camera, his hand on the shoulder of a man I recognized from the news. A district attorney who'd resigned suddenly amid scandal. The caption called Sadowski a prominent investor and philanthropist. The comments section told a different story. I closed the laptop, stared at the business card still sitting on my kitchen counter, cream-colored and expensive, mocking me with its minimalist elegance. Penthouse. 8 p.m. Who has dinner with a man who could ruin her life? Someone desperate, maybe. Someone stupid. Someone who'd felt the way conversation stopped when he entered a room and mistaken it for respect instead of fear. I should throw the card away, block whatever number might be attached to it, show up for my next shift at Le Couronne and pray Claudette didn't fire me for the porcelain massacre, and pray harder that Sadowski never came back. Except he'd smiled. Not the smile of a man who wanted to punish me, but something stranger. Curiosity laced with something I couldn't name. And he'd given me a choice. Have dinner with me tomorrow, when men like him, men with that kind of power, didn't usually bother with asking. I picked up the card again, turned it over. On the back, in handwriting too elegant to be accidental, were 3 words. I don't bite. I was dressed and out the door by 7:15. The address led to a building in the financial district that didn't advertise itself. No doorman in uniform, no golden awning, no name chiseled into granite. Just a single unmarked door of brushed steel and a camera positioned at precisely the right angle to capture anyone approaching. I stood on the sidewalk for 3 full minutes, watching my reflection warp in the metal surface. You can still leave, I told myself. Turn around. Go home. Pretend this never happened. The door opened before I could decide. Not electronically. A man opened it. 6'3", shoulders that suggested he'd been selected for exactly that reason, wearing a suit that didn't quite hide the bulk beneath. His eyes moved over me with the efficiency of a TSR scanner, cataloging, assessing, determining threat level. Miss Honer. Not a question. Mr. Sadowski is expecting you. He already knew my name. The thought should have sent me running. Instead, I stepped inside. The lobby was all dark marble and, recessed lighting, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. The elevator required a key card the man produced from his inner pocket. He inserted it, pressed the button marked PH, then stepped back out. "Top floor," he said, as if I might have missed the implication. "He's waiting." The doors closed. The elevator rose with the kind of smooth silence that costs more than most people's cars. I watched the numbers climb, 12, 18, 24, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. Not a hallway, not a foyer. The apartment itself spread out like a kingdom rendered in glass and steel and money. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the entire space, offering a view of Boston that looked like something from a film. The harbor glittering with reflected light, the Zakim Bridge lit violet and gold, downtown spreading out below like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. The furniture was minimal, expensive, the kind that suggested someone had hired a designer and then ignored half their suggestions. Leather and chrome. A single piece of abstract art dominating one wall, all violent reds and blacks that looked like anger rendered in oil paint. And books. More than I expected. An entire wall of them, leather-bound and well-worn, organized by some system I couldn't immediately parse. Most people comment on the view first. I spun. Sadowski stood near the windows, backlit by the city, holding 2 glasses of something amber. He'd traded the suit for dark slacks and a charcoal button-down, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The tattoos I'd glimpsed at Le Coron spread up his left arm in intricate patterns, geometric shapes interwoven with script I couldn't read from this distance. He looked younger here, less armor, more human. Somehow that made him more dangerous. Not less. The view is... I searched for words that wouldn't sound idiotic. Expensive. He smiled. Actually smiled. Not the predator's grin from the restaurant, but something almost genuine. Honest. I appreciate that. He crossed the space between us with that same controlled grace, offered one of the glasses. Bourbon. You're not allergic? No, I took it automatically. How did you know I'd come? I didn't. He gestured toward a dining table set for 2, positioned to overlook the city. But I hoped. Hope seemed worth 2 hours of my chef's time. A chef. Not a chef, but his chef. Of course. The table was set with the kind of careful precision that reminded me of Le Coron. Silver that caught the light. Crystal that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A centerpiece of white orchids that looked like they'd been positioned by someone with a protractor. Sit, he said. Not a command exactly. An invitation with edges. I sat. Dinner arrived in courses I didn't order, delivered by staff I never saw clearly. Just movements at the edge of my peripheral vision, plates appearing and disappearing with professional silence. The food was extraordinary. Seared scallops with a citrus reduction that tasted like summer. Duck breast so tender it fell apart under my fork. A wine I didn't recognize but that Sadowski identified as a Burgundy from a vineyard that doesn't export, without explaining how he'd acquired it. We made small talk for the first 20 minutes. Surface observations about the weather, the city, a recent gallery opening he'd attended. He asked how long I'd worked at Le Coron. I asked how he'd discovered it. We circled each other verbally like boxers in early rounds, testing range and reflex. Then the conversation shifted. Chemistry, he said, setting down his wine glass. Boston University, graduated 3 years ago. Honors thesis on synthetic polymers. Student debt approximately $48,000. Currently in deferment while you work full-time to cover your mother's medical expenses in Vermont. The room tilted slightly. You have one aunt. No, wait. Your mother's friend, not blood relation. Thomas Chen, restaurant industry veteran, the one who got you the job at Le Couronne. He paused, watching my face. Your apartment is in Alston, third floor walk-up, $1,400 a month, which is $200 more than you can comfortably afford. You're 2 months behind on your electric bill. I set down my fork carefully, precisely, because my hands wanted to shake, and I refused to give him the satisfaction. How? I make it my business to know things, Denise. He used my first name like he'd earned it. Especially about people who touch me without permission. That was an accident. I know. He leaned back, studying me, which is why you're here instead of somewhere else. The implication hung in the air like smoke. What do you want from me? My voice came out steadier than I felt. You don't invite someone to dinner just to tell them you've researched their credit score. No. He agreed. I invite someone to dinner because they're interesting. You're interesting, Denise. You kissed a man you didn't know in a room full of people who fear him, and your first instinct wasn't to run or grovel or freeze. You tried to apologize. Most people apologize when they've done something wrong. Most people recognize power and react accordingly. He tilted his head slightly. You recognized it. I could see that. But you didn't change, didn't perform. You were just yourself, exhausted and terrified and still trying to do your job correctly. Something in his voice shifted, went softer, almost admiring. Do you know how rare that is? I didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know if it was a compliment or an accusation or something else entirely. The silence stretched. Outside, the city glittered. Inside, I sat across from a man who knew my debt and my address, and probably a dozen other things I hadn't told anyone, feeling like I'd walked into a negotiation I didn't understand. I'm going to make you an offer, Sadowski said finally. You can refuse it. That's allowed. But I want you to hear it first. My throat felt tight. What kind of offer? Work for me. He said it casually, like he was offering me a refill on coffee. Not at Le Couronne. Here, private service, dinners, events, the kind of hosting that requires someone who understands discretion and precision. I'm a waitress, not a... You're a chemist working as a waitress because you're loyal to your mother and smart enough to prioritize survival over pride. He cut through my objections smoothly. That's exactly what I need. Someone who pays attention. Someone who understands consequences. And if I say no, then I'll have someone drive you home and you'll never hear from me again. He paused. Your debt, however, will remain yours. Your mother's medical expenses will continue, and you'll go back to Le Couronne and spend the next 5 years breaking your body for people who don't remember your name. It wasn't a threat. That was the worst part. It was just true. Why me? I asked. You could hire anyone, someone with actual experience in whatever this is, because everyone else would take the job out of fear or greed. He met my eyes, direct and unwavering. You'd take it out of necessity. That makes you loyal. And loyalty, Denise, is the only currency that actually matters in my world. I looked down at my plate. The duck had gone cold. My wine sat untouched, the glass leaving a ring of condensation on the table. And if I say yes, then your debts disappear. Your mother's care is handled. You work reasonable hours for unreasonable pay, and in exchange, you show up when I need you and keep your observations to yourself. It sounded too easy. Nothing was ever that easy. There's something you're not telling me, I said slowly. He smiled again. That dangerous smile from the restaurant. the one that suggested he was pleased I'd noticed. There's a great deal I'm not telling you, but here's the most important part. Working for me means entering a world where the wrong conversation in the wrong room can have permanent consequences. It means being associated with a man most of the city either fears or pretends not to notice. It means giving up the kind of anonymous safety you have now. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, close enough that I could see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes. It means trusting me to protect you from the things that protection attracts. My heart was hammering. And if I can't do that, trust you, then don't take the job. He sat back. But make the decision now, Denise. I don't make offers twice. I thought about my apartment with its broken heating and the landlord's increasingly aggressive notes. About my mother's last phone call, her voice thin with pain she tried to hide. About the chemistry degree I'd worked myself sick to earn and the career I couldn't afford to start. About the way this man had looked at me in a dining room, full of witnesses, and chosen curiosity over rage. There's a third option, Sadowski said quietly, and something in his voice had changed, gone lighter, almost playful. If working for me feels too complicated, what's that? Marry me instead. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. That's safer, simpler, much better benefits package. I stared at him. You're joking. Am I? He picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip, watching me over the rim. Marriage makes you family. Family is protected absolutely. No conditions, no questions. An employee can quit. A wife... He set the glass down. Well, that's a different kind of contract. You don't even know me. I know enough. You're smart, loyal, brave in ways you probably don't realize, and you kiss like you mean it. The corner of his mouth curved. Even when it's an accident. Heat flooded my face. You're insane. Probably. He didn't sound bothered by it. But I'm also serious. Think about it. I'm not going to marry a stranger. Then work for me, or go home. But decide, Denise. He checked his watch. Platinum, expensive, the kind that kept time in 3 continents. You have 30 seconds. That's not enough time to... 25 seconds. Life rarely gives you enough time. You make the choice anyway. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every rational thought screamed at me to leave, to run, to go back to my safe, small, suffocating life where the worst thing that could happen was getting fired. But I thought about what he'd said. Loyalty is the only currency that matters. And I thought about the way he'd smiled when I'd tried to apologize instead of beg. Okay, I heard myself say. I'll work for you. The words felt like stepping off a cliff. Sadowski nodded once, satisfied. Good. You start Monday. Someone will bring the contract to your apartment tomorrow. Read it carefully, I insist. For tonight. He stood, offering his hand like a gentleman from another era. Let me have someone drive you home. I took his hand. His grip was warm, solid, and when he helped me to my feet, he didn't let go immediately. One more thing, he said, quiet enough that it felt like a secret. When you Googled me last night, and I know you did, you read things that frightened you. Those things are mostly true, but so is this. While you work for me, no one touches you. Not my enemies, not my allies, not anyone. You're under my protection now. He released my hand. Remember that when you sign the contract. The car waiting downstairs was a Mercedes, black and sleek, and piloted by a driver who didn't speak except to confirm my address, which he already knew. I sat in leather seats that still smelled new and watched the city blur past, the business card still in my pocket, my head spinning with everything that had just happened. Somewhere between the financial district and Alston, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Sleep well, Denise. Monday will be interesting." I stared at the message until the car pulled up to my apartment building, third-floor walk-up. $2,400 a month I couldn't afford. Then I typed back, "How did you get my number?" The response came immediately. "I make it my business to know things." I thought we established that. Then, a moment later, "P.S. The marriage offer stands. Think about it." I climbed out of the Mercedes, walked up 3 flights of stairs, and let myself into my apartment where the electricity still worked despite the overdue bill. And I thought about it. God help me. I thought about it. Should Denise take the job? Or accept his proposal? Comment. Job or marriage, share this with someone who loves dangerous romance. The contract arrived Sunday morning in the hands of a woman who looked like she billed by the 6-minute increment. "Miss Honer?" She stood in my doorway in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent, holding a leather portfolio like it contained state secrets. "I'm Jennifer Cow, Mr. Sadowski's attorney. May I come in?" I stepped back automatically, suddenly aware of how my apartment must look to someone who worked for a man with a penthouse view of the entire city. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter. The chemistry textbooks I still couldn't bring myself to sell. The single dying plant on the windowsill that I kept forgetting to water. She didn't seem to notice. Just set the portfolio on my small table, extracted a document that had to be 40 pages long, and laid it out with the precision of a surgeon arranging instruments. "Employment contract," she said crisply. "Standard terms for private household staff, modified for Mr. Sadowski's specific requirements. You have 72 hours to review. I recommend you read every page. He insists on informed consent." She produced a business card, her own this time, with a phone number and email address. "Questions go to me, not to him. That's in the contract as well. Section 12, subsection B." Then she was gone, leaving behind 40 pages of legal terminology and the faint scent of expensive perfume. I read the contract 3 times. The first time, I thought I'd misunderstood the salary. The second time, I used a calculator to confirm I hadn't hallucinated an extra 0. The third time, I focused on what was buried in the middle sections, the clauses that mattered more than money. Employee agrees to maintain absolute discretion regarding client's business affairs, personal matters, and any information observed or overheard during the course of employment. Client agrees to provide comprehensive security measures for employees' protection, including but not limited to transportation, residential security systems, and personal security detail as deemed necessary. Employment may be terminated by either party with 2 weeks' notice, except in cases of breach of confidentiality, which constitute immediate termination and potential legal action. And then, buried in Section 18, client assumes full financial responsibility for employees' existing debts, including student loans, federal and private, outstanding medical bills for employees' immediate family, and current residential lease obligations. These payments are considered separate from salary and are non-retractable regardless of employment status. He was going to pay off my debts whether I stayed or quit. I set the contract down and stared at the dying plant on my windowsill, trying to understand what kind of man structured a contract this way, trying to understand what he actually wanted from me that was worth this much money. My phone buzzed. "Read the whole thing yet?" Unknown number. "Sadowski." I typed back. How do you know I'm reading it right now? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Lucky guess. Questions? I had about 1,000, but I typed Section 18. Why? His response came immediately. Because loyalty shouldn't cost you your future. Sign it or don't. But if you sign it, I want you thinking about the job, not about which bill to pay first. I read that message 4 times, looking for the trap, the catch, the hidden price. I still hadn't found it by Monday morning when I returned to Le Couronne for my shift. The restaurant had changed. Or maybe I had. But the moment I walked through the employee entrance, I felt it. The shift in atmospheric pressure that came from being observed differently than before. Margot, who'd been friendly enough to occasionally split her shift tips with me when I was short, found a reason to be in the walk-in cooler when I arrived. David, who normally complained about his car and his ex-wife with equal enthusiasm, gave me a tight nod and turned back to polishing wine glasses with sudden intense focus. And Antoine, who'd worked at Le Couronne for 15 years and treated everyone with the same gruff impatience, actually stepped aside when I reached for the coffee station. Denise, he said quietly. Not Denise. Denis. The nickname they'd all used before Friday night, but now it sounded different. Careful. Hey, Antoine. Busy weekend? Busy enough. He glanced toward Claudette's office, then back to me. Look, I don't know what happened Friday after you left, and I don't want to know, but maybe keep your head down for a while, yeah? I'm just doing my job. Yeah. He picked up his tray, balanced it with the ease of long practice. Just make sure that's all you're doing. He left before I could ask what he meant. I found out second period into lunch service. Claudette pulled me aside after I'd delivered appetizers to table 6, physically took my elbow and steered me into the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the wine cellar. We need to talk. Her voice was low, urgent. The kind of tone that meant whatever came next wouldn't be a compliment on my tableside manner. If this is about Friday, I already apologized to... This isn't about the broken porcelain. She cut me off, glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to materialize from the shadows. This is about the fact that Paul Sadowski personally requested your contact information from me on Saturday, and the fact that Marco DeLuca called this morning to ask if you still worked here, and the fact that I've had 3 separate reservations cancel in the last 2 days from people who suddenly have scheduling conflicts. My stomach dropped. I don't understand. Don't you? Her eyes were hard. You work in fine dining long enough, you learn to read patterns? People are nervous, Dennis. They think... She paused, choosing words carefully. They think you're connected to Sadowski now, and that makes them nervous about being seen here. I'm not. We're not. It was an accident. Accidents don't end with private dinners in financial district penthouses. She said it flatly, watching my face. Yes, I know about that too, because half the city knows. That's how this works. Heat flooded my face. Nothing happened. I believe you, but it doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what people think happened. She released my elbow, softened slightly. Look, you're a good worker, reliable. I don't want to lose you, but I also can't have drama that drives away customers. So I'm asking you, as clearly as I can, are you involved with Paul Sadowski? I thought about the contract sitting unsigned on my kitchen table, about the text messages and the marriage proposal delivered like a joke that wasn't entirely joking. I'm working my notice, I said instead of answering. 2 weeks, then I'm done. Claudette studied my face for a long moment, then nodded, resignation settling into her features. Yeah, she said quietly. That's what I thought. I noticed the car on my walk home. Black sedan, American make, parked across from my apartment building with the kind of careful positioning that suggested the driver wanted a clear view of the entrance, but didn't want to be obvious about it. Except it was obvious. At least to me. I'd walked past the same car 3 times in the last week. Once near Le Couronne, once outside the grocery store on Cambridge Street, once idling at a red light when I'd crossed to the pharmacy. Different locations. Same car, same driver, probably, though I'd never gotten close enough to see clearly. I stopped on the sidewalk, 20 feet from my building, and stared directly at the sedan. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. The man who emerged was not the one who'd let me into Sadowski's building. Different build, leaner, harder, with the kind of economy of movement that suggested military training or something close to it. Dark jacket, hands visible, expression neutral. He crossed the street toward me with the inevitability of tide. "Miss Honer." He stopped at a respectful distance. 3 feet, maybe. Close enough to speak quietly, far enough that I could run if I needed to. "I'm not here to bother you, just making sure you get home safely." "I've been getting home safely for 3 years without help." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't smile. "But that was before." "Before what?" "Before the video." The word landed like a stone in still water. "What video?" He hesitated. For the first time, his professional neutrality cracked slightly, a flicker of something that might have been discomfort or sympathy or both. "The surveillance footage from Friday night, Le Couronne's security cameras." He cleared his throat. "It's circulating. Mr. Sadowski asked me to inform you if you noticed us, so you'd understand why we're here." My mouth had gone dry. "Circulating where?" "Certain circles. People who pay attention to Mr. Sadowski's movements." He chose his words carefully, like he was translating from a language I didn't speak. "The footage shows the incident, and his reaction to it. People are making assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" "The kind that make you a person of interest." He met my eyes directly. "Which means you need protection, whether you want it or not." The street felt suddenly smaller, the evening shadows deeper. "And if I tell you to leave? Then I'll park a block farther away." No apology in his voice, just fact. "But I won't leave. Those are my orders." "From Sadowski." "Yes, ma'am." I wanted to be angry, wanted to feel violated or manipulated or any of the reasonable emotions that should accompany discovering you're being followed. But underneath the shock, I felt something else. Fear. Because if Sadowski thought I needed protection, it meant there was something to be protected from. "What's your name?" I asked. "Miller, ma'am." "Are you going to follow me everywhere?" "For now." He paused. "There are others on different shifts. You won't always see us. But we're there." "How long?" "As long as necessary." He stepped back, preparing to retreat to his car. "Mr. Sadowski suggested I give you this." He held out a phone. Not mine, a new one, still in its box. iPhone, latest model. His number's programmed in. So is mine, and the numbers for the rest of the security detail. You need anything at all, you call. Someone will answer within 30 seconds. I took the phone automatically, feeling its weight in my palm. "Is he always like this?" I asked. "This controlling?" Miller's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "He's usually worse," he said. "You should feel flattered." Then he crossed back to his sedan, climbed in, and settled into position like a man prepared to wait forever. I stood on the sidewalk holding a phone I hadn't asked for, watching a car that wouldn't leave, and finally understood what Sadowski had meant when he said, "Entering my world means giving up anonymous safety." My anonymity was already gone. The video had taken it. I activated the phone. In my apartment, sitting on my bed with the door locked and the deadbolt thrown. Not that it would matter, apparently, since I now had professional security whether I wanted it or not. One contact in the directory. P.S. I stared at it for a full minute before typing, "You're having me followed." The response came within seconds. "I'm having you protected. There's a difference. You didn't ask permission." Would you have said yes? I wanted to argue, wanted to demand he call off his people and let me live my life. Instead, I typed, "Who's seen the video?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. This time, when his response came, it was longer. "People who matter in my world, rivals, mostly. They're trying to understand what you mean to me, whether you're leverage or liability. I'm using their confusion to expose who I can't trust. It's working, but it also means you're visible in ways that aren't safe. So I'm bait. You're protected bait. There's a difference." I stared at that message, anger and fear warring in my chest. You should have told me. I'm telling you now, and I'm keeping you safe. Sign the contract, Denise. Let me do this properly. I set the phone down and pulled out the contract, still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd left it that morning. 40 pages, absurd salary, debt forgiveness, protection, and underneath it all, the truth I was finally starting to understand. Paul Sadowski didn't do anything without purpose. He'd chosen me, not randomly, not accidentally, but deliberately, because I'd surprised him, because I'd shown him something he valued, and now I was part of his world whether I'd signed anything or not. The kiss had been an accident. Everything after was choice. I picked up a pen, flipped to the last page, and signed my name in the space marked Employee. Then I took a photo of the signature page and texted it to him. His response was immediate. "Welcome aboard. Miller will bring you to the office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dress comfortably. It's going to be a long day." Then, a moment later, "And Denise? Thank you for trusting me." I looked out my window. 3 floors down, Miller's sedan sat in its careful position, maintaining its vigil. I didn't feel particularly trusting, but I felt, for the first time in 3 years, like someone was watching my back instead of waiting for me to fail. It would have to be enough. Miller arrived at 8:45 a.m. in a different car, sleek gray Audi that looked like it cost more than I'd make in 2 years, even with Sadowski's absurd salary. "Morning, Miss Honer." He held the rear door open with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Mr. Sadowski's waiting." I climbed in, still not entirely convinced this was real, that I'd signed a contract that paid off my debts, that I now had a security detail and a phone with a single programmed contact, that my life had fundamentally rewritten itself in the space of 4 days because I'd tripped into a man I didn't know. The Audi moved through Monday morning traffic with the kind of aggressive confidence that suggested Miller had places to be and no patience for delays. We didn't go to the financial district penthouse. Instead, we headed south toward the seaport, pulling up in front of a building that looked like it had been a warehouse once, all exposed brick and industrial windows, gentrified into something that probably appeared in architecture magazines. No sign, no indication of what happened inside. Miller walked me to a side entrance, used a key card, led me down a corridor that smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne. We stopped at an unmarked door. "He's inside. Miller said, then quieter. Stay close to him tonight. Don't wander. Don't talk to anyone he doesn't introduce you to first. Tonight? But he was already walking away, leaving me standing in front of a door I hadn't agreed to open. I knocked. Come in, Denise. Sadowski's voice, muffled by wood and distance. The office was nothing like the penthouse. This was a workspace. Functional, efficient, designed for business, not aesthetics. Dark wood desk, multiple monitors, filing cabinets that probably required their own security clearance. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, but they were tinted, making the water look gray and distant. Sadowski stood at one of the monitors, studying something I couldn't see, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. The tattoos on his left arm looked darker in the artificial light, script and geometry I still couldn't fully parse. He glanced over when I entered. You signed. You knew I would. I hoped you would. There's a difference. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. We have a lot to cover before tonight. I sat. Miller mentioned tonight. What's tonight? Your introduction to the part of my business that matters. He moved away from the monitors, settled into his own chair with the casual authority of someone who'd built this empire from something smaller and darker. I own a club. Technically 3 clubs, but one in particular serves a specific clientele. People who prefer privacy, who value discretion, who do business that doesn't happen in boardrooms. Your people. Some of them. Others are competitors, rivals, enemies pretending to be neutral. He steepled his fingers, watching me. The club is called Meridian. You'll work there tonight. Observing mostly. Learning faces. Learning who defers to whom. Learning the language. What language? Power. He said it simply. Money is easy. Anyone can acquire money. But power, real power, requires understanding hierarchies you can't see on an org chart. It requires reading the space between words, knowing when silence is agreement and when it's a threat. He leaned forward slightly. You're good at that already. You proved it at Le Couronne. You watched. You, adapted? You learned who mattered without anyone telling you. That's why you're here. I thought I was here to serve drinks. You're here because you're intelligent enough to be useful and self-aware enough not to be stupid about it. He stood, crossed to a cabinet, pulled out a garment bag. Tonight you'll see what I actually do. What my world looks like when it's not pretending to be legitimate. And then you'll decide if you can handle it. I already signed the contract. Contracts can be terminated. He held out the garment bag. This is for tonight. It should fit. I had someone check your apartment for sizes. I took it automatically, too surprised to argue about the privacy violation. Inside was a dress. Black, elegant, expensive. The kind of thing I'd seen on women in Le Couronne's private dining rooms, but never imagined wearing myself. 9 p.m., Sadowski said. Miller will pick you up. Don't be late. That's it? That's all the preparation I get? The best preparation is experience. He returned to his monitors, already shifting his attention to whatever empires required management at 10 a.m. on a Monday. Oh, and Denise? I paused at the door. Don't be afraid to watch me tonight. I want you to see who I am. All of it. Meridian occupied 3 floors of a building in the South End that looked abandoned from the outside and exclusive from within. Miller escorted me through a rear entrance, past security that checked credentials with the thoroughness of TSA agents, into an elevator that required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. The doors opened onto luxury rendered in shadow and blue light. all dark leather, polished chrome, and the kind of ambient music designed to encourage conversation without being remembered. Sadowski waited near the bar, talking to a man I didn't recognize. When he saw me, he said something that made the other man nod and retreat, then crossed the space between us with that controlled grace I was starting to recognize as his default state. "You look perfect." He said it clinically, assessing. "Expensive enough to belong, not flashy enough to draw attention." "Good." "You're welcome." The corner of his mouth ticked up. "Thank you. Now come meet people who will smile at you and remember everything you say." He guided me through the club with one hand at the small of my back, proprietary, protective, impossible to misread. We stopped at tables where men in suits stood when Sadowski approached, where women in dresses that cost more than my former rent assessed me with the efficiency of appraisers at auction. He introduced me simply, "Denise. She works for me." No elaboration, no explanation, just fact, delivered with the weight of warning underneath. And I watched how a man named Chen spoke carefully, choosing words like he was navigating a minefield. Watched how a woman called Irina touched Sadowski's arm briefly, familiar but not intimate, a test of boundaries he didn't acknowledge. Watched how the bartender brought Sadowski's drink without being asked. How the security near the VIP section shifted position when he moved. How conversation volumes dropped when he approached groups. This was his kingdom. Not the office, not the penthouse. This place where power moved in coded language and everyone played chess with consequences I was only beginning to understand. We were on the second floor, overlooking the main room, when I saw them. 2 men. Dark suits, expensive watches, standing near the far bar in a position that gave them clear view of the VIP section where we stood. They weren't looking directly at us, but they were watching. Tracking. I felt it the way you feel a camera pointed at your back. "Sadowski," I said quietly. "I know." He didn't turn. "They arrived 10 minutes ago. Brennan's people." "Who's Brennan?" "Someone who thinks your existence is an opportunity." He took a slow sip of his bourbon, the movement casual, unhurried. "Someone who's wrong." One of the men started moving. Not toward us, toward the exit, phone pressed to his ear, speaking to someone I couldn't see. Sadowski's hand tightened slightly at my back. "Miller." He didn't raise his voice, but somehow Miller appeared from the shadows within seconds. "Take Denise to the car. Don't leave until I come down." "What's happening?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "A conversation I need to have without you present." He finally looked at me, something dark moving behind his eyes. "Go with Miller. Now." "But now, Denise." Miller's hand was already on my elbow, firm but not rough, steering me toward a different exit than we'd entered through. I caught one last glimpse of Sadowski, standing perfectly still, watching the men who'd been watching us, his expression gone cold and remote as winter. Then the elevator doors closed, and we were descending into underground parking. "What just happened?" I demanded. "Mr. Sadowski is handling it." Miller's voice was flat, professional. "My job is keeping you clear of the handling." The car was already running, positioned near the elevator with military precision. Miller opened the rear door, waited until I was inside, then climbed into the driver's seat and pulled out with controlled speed. I watched the building recede through the rear window, searching for, what? Signs of violence? Police? Some indication of what handling it actually meant? Nothing. Just a building that looked empty from the outside, keeping its secrets. My phone buzzed. "You stepped into my world the moment you touched me." Sadowski's text appeared on the screen, stark and certain. Now you'll stay alive because of me, or die because of someone who wants me dead. That's the price of protection. Still think you can handle it? I stared at the message while Miller drove through Boston's late-night streets, security detail trailing in a second car I hadn't noticed until now. Finally, I typed, "Back. What happened to the men who were watching us?" 3 dots, then, "They're leaving," with a message for Brennan about the cost of looking at what's mine. I read that twice. The possessive, the threat underneath. I'm not a thing to be owned. No, you're a person to be protected. Learn the difference. The car pulled up to my building. Miller was already out, scanning the street with professional paranoia before opening my door. "All clear, Miss Honer." I climbed out, still holding the phone, still processing what I'd seen at Meridian. The elegance, the danger, the way Sadowski moved through both like they were the same thing. One more text arrived as I reached my apartment door. "Sleep well. Tomorrow we discuss what you observed tonight. Every detail matters." I locked my door, threw the deadbolt, and changed out of the expensive dress into clothes that felt like mine, but I didn't sleep well. Because I'd seen his world tonight. The real one, underneath the penthouses and the contracts and the careful words. And I was starting to understand that protection and danger were just 2 sides of the same coin he'd been flipping since the moment I'd kissed him. The question was which side would land face up when it finally stopped spinning. Is Sadowski protecting her or using her? Comment your theory. Like if you're Team Sadowski, share if you think Denise is in over her head. 3 weeks into working for Paul Sadowski, I started to forget what fear felt like. Not entirely. I still noticed Miller's sedan trailing my morning coffee runs. Still caught myself scanning rooms the way Sadowski did, cataloging exits, counting security, noting who deferred to whom. Still woke sometimes at 3 a.m., thinking about the men at Meridian, the ones who'd watched me like I was leverage waiting to be exploited, but the routine dulled the edges. Morning briefings in Sadowski's office where I reported observations from Meridian, from the restaurants, from the carefully orchestrated events where Boston's legitimate power mixed with its shadow economy. Afternoons learning the businesses, which were actually profitable, which laundered money, which existed purely as fronts. Evenings at his side, watching him negotiate in the language of implication and threat. He was teaching me his world, methodically, patiently. I should have known patience was just another form of preparation. It happened on a Thursday. I'd spent the afternoon at Convergence, one of Sadowski's legitimate holdings, a gallery in the South End that sold contemporary art to people who bought it for tax write-offs and social currency. My job was simple. Observe the opening, note who attended, report back on conversations that felt important. It was boring work, safe work, the kind that made me think maybe this job wouldn't be as dangerous as that first night at Meridian had suggested. The opening ended at 8. I texted Miller that I was ready for pickup, gathered my coat, said goodnight to the gallery manager who thought I was some kind of artistic consultant and treated me with careful deference. The street outside was quiet. Thursday evening in November, cold enough that most people had already retreated indoors. A few couples walked past, bundled against the wind. Cars lined both sides of the narrow street, sedans and SUVs belonging to residents of the newly renovated brownstones. Miller's Audi wasn't there yet. I checked my phone. No response to my text. That was unusual. He normally confirmed within 30 seconds. I waited. 60 seconds, 90. A car approached from the west, black SUV, windows tinted dark. It slowed as it passed the gallery, and some instinct I'd developed over 3 weeks of watching Sadowski's World made my pulse spike. Wrong car, wrong approach, wrong. The SUV stopped. Doors opened. 2 men emerged with the efficiency of people who'd practiced this. Not running, that would draw attention. Just moving with purpose. Crossing the sidewalk toward me in the 5 seconds it took my brain to process what was happening. I ran. Not toward the gallery. They were between me and the door. Toward the intersection, toward light and traffic and witnesses. My heels clicked against pavement, loud as gunshots in the quiet street. I made it 15 feet. A hand caught my arm, yanked hard enough to spin me around. I opened my mouth to scream, and someone's palm covered it, pressed hard enough to bruise. The smell of leather and cigarettes and something chemical? Chloroform? No. Just cologne, cheap and overwhelming. "Don't fight," a voice said near my ear, low, almost apologetic. "Makes it harder for everyone." I fought anyway, drove my elbow back into ribs, felt the satisfying impact. Twisted, trying to break the grip on my arm. Got one hand free and went for eyes, for throat, for anything vulnerable like the self-defense videos I'd watched on YouTube at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. Then something hard pressed against my side. Not quite my ribs, but close enough. "Gun," the voice said simply. "Stop." I stopped. They moved me toward the SUV with practiced efficiency. One hand still over my mouth, the other gripping my arm, the gun a constant pressure point promising consequences. The rear door was already open. They pushed me inside, followed immediately, sandwiching me between bodies while the driver pulled away from the curb with the careful speed of someone obeying traffic laws. The whole thing took maybe 20 seconds. No one on the street even noticed. They didn't blindfold me. That felt important somehow, the kind of detail that suggested either supreme confidence or the certainty that I wouldn't be identifying anyone later. I tried to track the route. South End to where? We crossed the bridge, headed into areas I didn't recognize. Industrial spaces, warehouses, buildings that looked abandoned but probably weren't. The kind of Boston tourists never saw. We pulled into a loading dock. Concrete and rust and the smell of old machinery. They extracted me from the SUV with the same efficiency they'd used to acquire me, walked me through a metal door into a space that had probably stored something legitimate once, but now just stored shadows and bad decisions. Overhead lights flickered, fluorescent, buzzing with electrical failure. Concrete floor stained with things I didn't want to identify. A single chair bolted to the floor in the center of the space, metal and unforgiving. They put me in it. Zip ties around my wrists, pulled tight enough to bite. My ankles bound to the chair legs, professional, practiced. Then they stepped back and I got my first clear look at them. 3 men. Mid-30s to early 40s, dressed like they worked legitimate jobs, slacks, button-downs, one in a pea coat that probably cost more than my former rent. Not thugs, not the stereotype. Just men who'd made calculations about risk and reward and decided I was worth the gamble. The one in the pea coat crouched in front of me, putting himself at eye level. Dark hair, graying at the temples, lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often but wasn't smiling now. "Denise Honer," he said. Not a question. "This is nothing personal. Kidnapping feels pretty personal." "Fair point." He almost smiled. "Almost. Let me rephrase. This isn't about you. It's about Paul Sadowski and certain territorial disagreements that have become problematic. You're making a mistake. Probably several." He stood, pulled out a phone, typed something. But the biggest mistake was his, getting attached to someone who isn't protected by blood or marriage. That's a vulnerability. We're just exploiting it." One of the other men laughed, short, sharp. "You think he'll actually come for her?" "He'll come," Peacoat said with certainty. "That's the point. We know where, we know when, and we'll be ready. He brings the men we need to see, the ones still loyal to him, and we eliminate the whole problem at once." My stomach went cold. "You're using me as bait." "Smart girl." He pocketed his phone. "Sadowski chose well. Shame it won't matter." They moved toward the far end of the warehouse, settling into positions where they could watch both me and the entrances. One pulled out a cigarette, lit it despite the no smoking sign barely visible in the gloom. Their voices dropped to murmurs I couldn't parse, discussing logistics probably, debating how long before Sadowski figured out where I was. I tested the zip ties, tight, professional grade, the kind you didn't break without tools or dislocating your thumbs. But the chair? I shifted my weight carefully. The bolts holding it to the floor felt secure, but the chair itself was old, metal fatigued by time and rust and neglect. I could feel it flex slightly when I moved. Chemistry degree, I thought distantly. Spent 4 years learning about molecular bonds and material stress points and how things break down at the structural level. I started rocking. Small movements at first, testing tolerance. The chair creaked, quiet enough that the men didn't notice over their conversation and the buzz of failing lights. I rocked harder. "Sadowski, POV shift." Miller's text came at 8:14 p.m. "She's gone." 2 words that rewrote the next 6 hours into singular focus. Paul Sadowski stood in his office, phone in hand, and felt something cold and ancient slide into place where strategy usually lived. Not panic. He'd stopped panicking at 14 when his father died and left him an empire built on blood. Not fear. Fear was for people who didn't understand that violence was just another form of negotiation. Rage. Controlled. Precise. The kind that made men talk before you even touched them. "Cameras," he said into the phone. Miller would understand. Would already be pulling footage, tracking vehicles, running plates through databases that technically didn't exist, but actually contained half of Boston's criminal infrastructure. He made 4 more calls. Short. Direct. By the 8th ring, he had 12 men mobilizing and 3 names of people who might know something. By the 10th ring, one of those people was in a room with soundproof walls, reconsidering their life choices. "Brennan," the man gasped, blood on his teeth, Sadowski's hand still fisted in his collar. "Brennan took her. Warehouse off Marginal Street, the one with—" Sadowski dropped him before he finished. Didn't need details, needed location. He had location. "Denise, resume." The chair leg snapped at 9:47 p.m. Not broke free, just fractured, metal giving way where rust had weakened the weld. But it was enough. Enough flex to work my right ankle free, then leverage that freedom to strain against the zip ties until the plastic cut deep enough to draw blood, but also stretched just enough. My hands were still bound. But I could stand. Could move. The men noticed. "Shit!" One of them started toward me. I grabbed the broken chair leg, jagged metal, still partially attached, and swung it like a bat at the overhead light nearest to me. Glass exploded. The warehouse went darker. I ran. Not toward the exits. They'd expect that. Toward the maze of old machinery and storage containers at the warehouse's far end, the shadows deep enough to hide in. My wrists were still zip-tied together, but I could use my hands, could feel my way through darkness while behind me they shouted and flashlights clicked on, beams cutting through the gloom. I found a metal shelving unit, climbed it one-handed, awkward and desperate, until I was 8 feet off the ground in the shadows where their lights hadn't reached yet. And I waited, counted my heartbeats, listened to them search, systematic, professional, spreading out to cover ground. Heard one of them radio someone. She's loose. Might need backup before... The warehouse door exploded inward, not opened. Exploded. The metal shrieking as hydraulic tools or brute force or controlled demolition, I didn't know which, tore it from its moorings. Then gunfire. Not wild. Not spray and pray. Precise bursts, professional. The kind that came from people who'd trained for exactly this scenario. I pressed myself flat against the shelving unit, hands over my ears, and heard men scream. Heard Peacoat shouting orders that got cut off mid-sentence. Heard footsteps moving through the warehouse with the inevitability of tide. Then silence. Worse than the gunfire, because silence meant it was over, and I didn't know who'd won. "Denise," Sadowski's voice, cutting through the dark. Not loud. He didn't need loud. "Where are you?" I should have felt relief. Should have climbed down and run to him and collapsed in the safety of being rescued. Instead, I stayed frozen, staring down at the warehouse floor where flashlight beams now illuminated bodies. 3 of them. Peacoat and his colleagues, positioned in ways that suggested they'd died fast. And Sadowski, standing in the center of it all, gun still in his hand, not a mark on him. He looked up, found me in the shadows with the unerring accuracy of a predator tracking prey. "Come down," he said, gentle, like he was coaxing a frightened animal. "It's over." I climbed down, stumbled on the last step, and his hand caught my arm. The same hand that had been holding a gun seconds ago, steadied me. "You're bleeding." He was already pulling a knife from his pocket, cutting the zip ties, his touch careful despite the violence still cooling in the air around us. "I'm fine." "You're not." He examined my wrists where the plastic had cut deep, his jaw tightening. "Miller, first aid kit, now." Miller materialized from the shadows with the kit. Sadowski cleaned the wounds himself, wrapped them in gauze with the precision of someone who'd done this before. For himself, probably. For others. I stared at the bodies, tried not to, failed. "Don't look at them," Sadowski said quietly. "Look at me." I did. His eyes were dark, remote. The man from the penthouse, from the office, from the careful negotiations, gone. This was someone else. Someone who killed without hesitation and moved on without remorse. "You came," I whispered. "Always." He finished bandaging my wrists, pulled me to my feet. "Let's get you out of here." He guided me toward the exit, his hand at my back, stepping over bodies like they were furniture. I made it outside before my knees gave out. He caught me before I hit the pavement, lowered me carefully to sit against the building's exterior wall, crouched in front of me. "Breathe," he said. "You're in shock. It'll pass." "You killed them." "Yes." No apology, no justification, just fact. "They were going to kill you," I managed. "Probably." He brushed hair from my face, the gesture at odds with everything else about him in this moment. "But they touched you first. That was the mistake that mattered." I looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd served me bourbon in a penthouse, who'd taught me the language of power, who'd just executed 3 people with clinical efficiency because they'd made me bait. "This is what protection looks like," I said, not a question. "This is what it costs." He stood, offered his hand. "Can you walk?" I took his hand. Let him pull me to my feet. Let him guide me to the car where Miller waited. And tried not to think about the fact that I'd just watched Paul Sadowski become a monster. For me. He just killed 3 men for her. Can love survive this much violence? Comment, stay or run. What should Denise do? I woke in silk sheets that cost more than my former security deposit. For 3 disoriented seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then it came back in fragments. The warehouse, the zip ties cutting into my wrists, the sound of gunfire, bodies on concrete, Sadowski's hand steady on my back as he guided me past the men he'd killed. I sat up too fast. The room tilted. Not the penthouse. Somewhere else. A bedroom decorated in shades of gray and cream, minimalist and expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking water I didn't recognize. Not the harbor. Somewhere farther out. Private. My clothes from last night were gone. Someone had dressed me in a white cotton shirt, his probably based on how it drowned me, and left my bandaged wrists carefully outside the sleeves. The door was closed but not locked. I could hear voices beyond it. Low, male, the cadence of people discussing logistics. I stood on unsteady legs and crossed to the window. The view clarified everything. We were north of the city, one of those coastal estates that appeared in magazine spreads about how the other half lived. Manicured grounds rolling down to private beach, a dock with 2 boats, security cameras positioned at intervals that suggested someone had calculated optimal coverage angles. A mansion, not a house, a fortress disguised as luxury. The voices beyond the door stopped. A knock. Soft. Miss Honer? You awake? Miller. I opened the door. He stood in the hallway holding a tray. Coffee, toast, fruit arranged with the kind of care that suggested someone's job description included making sure kidnapping victims are properly fed. Morning, he said, neutral as always. Mr. Sadowski asked me to bring this up. Said you'd probably be disoriented. Where am I? His house. North Shore. About 40 minutes outside the city. He set the tray on a side table just inside the door. You're safe here. Full security. Medical on-site if you need it. He'll be up shortly. I want to go home. Not yet. Something almost apologetic crossed his face. Brennan's still a problem. Until that's resolved, this is home. He left before I could argue. I stared at the coffee, dark roast, fixed the way I took it, which meant someone had been paying attention, and felt the reality settle into my bones. I was safe. I was also a prisoner. Sadowski appeared an hour later, knocking once before entering without waiting for permission. He looked different in daylight, in his own space. No suit jacket, just dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed up to reveal the full scope of the tattoos on his left arm. Script in a language I still couldn't read. Geometric patterns that probably meant something to someone. He'd showered. Changed. Erased any evidence of last night's violence. But I could still see it. In the way he moved, the careful control. In his eyes when they found mine. Searching, assessing, cataloging damage. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I watched you kill 3 people. He absorbed that without flinching. Fair assessment. You said you'd protect me. I stayed by the window, kept the distance between us deliberate. You didn't say you'd execute people. What did you think protection looked like? Not defensive. Genuinely asking. Strongly worded warnings, legal injunctions. Denise, the men who took you were going to use you to kill me and everyone loyal to me. Then they were going to kill you to eliminate the witness. There was no negotiation, no middle ground, just them or us. So you chose violence. I chose survival. He moved closer, stopped when I stiffened. And yes, that meant violence. That's what my world is. That's what I told you the first night. Entering it means giving up the kind of safety that comes from being invisible. You're not invisible anymore. You're mine. And that means people will try to use you, hurt you, leverage you. My job is making sure they fail. By killing them, when necessary. He said it calmly, like we were discussing weather. Would you prefer I'd let them keep you? Waited for law enforcement that would have arrived too late? Let Brennan's people use you for whatever they'd planned? I wanted to argue. Wanted to find the moral high ground and claim it. But I'd seen Peacoat's eyes. Heard him explain, almost apologetically, that my death was just collateral damage in a larger war. You're everything they say you are, I said finally. Every article I read. Every whispered warning at Le Couronne. The violence, the ruthlessness, the... Yes. He cut me off quietly. I am. I've built an empire on blood and silence, and the kind of fear that keeps people compliant. I've hurt people who threatened me, killed people who tried to take what's mine. I've made choices that would horrify you if you knew all of them. He moved to the window, stood beside me but not touching, looking out at the water. I was 14 when my father died, murdered, though the police called it an accident because the people who killed him owned enough of the department to rewrite narratives. He'd been building something, not legitimate, not clean, but something. And when he died, every vulture in Boston tried to take it. His voice had gone quiet, distant. I had a choice. Give it up, disappear, live whatever small life I could salvage, or become something they'd fear more than they'd feared him. So I became that. Learned how to hurt people efficiently, how to read weakness and exploit it, how to turn loyalty into currency and fear into armor. He glanced at me. I was good at it, better than he ever was. By 20, I'd doubled his territory. By 25, I'd eliminated every rival who'd celebrated his death. By 30, I'd built something big enough that legitimate businessmen had to pretend I was one of them. And now I run an empire that's half legal, half shadow. I own restaurants and galleries and real estate that actually make money. And I own other things, clubs, logistics networks, services that exist in spaces the law doesn't reach. He turned to face me fully. I'm a criminal, Denise. A successful one, but a criminal. The word hung between us. So why tell me this? I asked. Why not just keep pretending you're a businessman with questionable associates? Because you saw me last night. Really saw me. And I'd rather you understand what you saw than build some fantasy version that doesn't match reality. He stepped closer. I didn't back away. I am violent when violence is required. I am ruthless with people who threaten what's mine. I make decisions most people couldn't stomach. But I'm also the man who'd burn down half of Boston before letting them touch you again. His hand lifted, hesitated, then carefully brushed the bandage on my wrist. Maybe that makes me a monster. Probably does. But I'm also the man who respects that you tried to apologize instead of beg, who values that you're smart enough to learn my world and stubborn enough not to be intimidated by it, who sees in you something I haven't seen in anyone else, someone who looks at power and doesn't automatically want to exploit it or submit to it. What do I do with it then? You survive it. You understand it. And maybe, if you decide I'm worth the risk, you help me remember there's more to protect than just territory and reputation. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who'd served me bourbon and taught me the language of power and killed 3 people without hesitation because they'd made me bait. You're asking me to accept this, I said slowly. To accept you. All of it. I'm asking you to see it clearly before deciding. He lowered his hand. You can leave. I'll have Miller take you home. Make sure you're protected until Brennan's handled. Pay out your contract. Erase any connection between us. Give you back the anonymous life you had before Friday night at Le Coron. Or you stay. Understand what being under my protection actually means. Accept that the man who sits across from you at dinner is the same man who pulled a trigger in a warehouse. That I'm both, and I won't apologize for either. The morning light caught the gray in his eyes, made them almost silver. I won't lie to you, Denise. Won't pretend I'm better than I am. But I will protect you with everything I have. And I will never, never treat you as less than you are. I thought about Peacoat's casual certainty that I was expendable. About the way Sadowski had found me in the dark, cut my bindings, bandaged my wrists with hands that had just held a gun. About the fact that he'd come for me, just like he said he would. You scare me, I admitted. Good. You should be scared. Fear keeps you careful. He held my gaze. But are you scared of me, or scared of what being associated with me means? I considered that. The second one, I said finally. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief, but close. Then we can work with that. We spent the rest of the morning in his study, a room lined with books and maps and the kind of technology that probably violated several surveillance laws. He showed me security footage from the warehouse, made me watch it. Not the killing. He skipped past that with clinical efficiency. But the approach, how his men had moved, the precision, the planning. This is what it takes to keep you safe, he said. 12 people mobilized in under an hour. Surveillance pulled from 3 different systems. Information extracted from sources I can't name. Violence executed without hesitation. He paused the footage. I need you to understand that this isn't temporary. As long as you're associated with me, you're a target. The only thing preventing people from using you is their certainty that I'll respond exactly as I did last night. With overwhelming force. With permanent consequences. He met my eyes. Can you live with that? I thought about my apartment, my student loans, my mother's medical bills. About 3 years serving people who didn't remember my name, about the way Sadowski looked at me like I was a person instead of furniture. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think I want to find out. He smiled. Actually smiled? Not the predator's grin, but something genuine and almost fragile. That's the most honest answer you could have given. He closed the laptop. Come on, I'll show you where you'll stay while Brennan's being handled. It's not a cage, Denise, just a fortress. Learn the difference. He offered his hand. I took it. And somewhere between the warehouse and the mansion, between the monster and the man, I made a choice that probably said more about me than him. I stayed. Who else is crying right now? Comment monster if you think he's irredeemable. Comment man if you think love can save him. Tag someone who needs to read this story. 6 weeks after the warehouse, I stopped flinching when cars slowed near me. Not because I'd forgotten what happened. The bandages were gone, but the scars remained. Thin white lines around my wrists that I caught Sadowski staring at sometimes. His jaw tightening in ways that suggested Brennan's problem had been resolved, permanently and thoroughly. I stopped flinching because I'd learned the difference between threat and protection. Miller's sedan 3 car lengths back wasn't surveillance, it was insurance. The man who appeared whenever I entered or left a building wasn't shadowing me, he was clearing space. The cameras Sadowski had installed in my apartment, after asking permission surprisingly, weren't invasion. They were early warning systems. I was living in a fortress that looked like freedom if you squinted right. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, I'd stopped being the waitress who'd accidentally kissed a dangerous man. I'd become something else. It started small. Sadowski owned 7 restaurants across Boston, 3 legitimate, 4 that served dual purposes I'd learned not to examine too closely. The legitimate ones were bleeding money, mismanaged by people who understood food but not business, or business but not people. "Look at this," he'd said one morning in his office, pushing financial reports across the desk. "Convergence lost $40,000 last quarter. The kitchen staff turns over every 6 months. Customer complaints about service quality up 18%. I'd scanned the numbers, recognizing patterns from my years at Le Couronne. "Your manager's skimming," I said. "Not much, small enough to hide and waste in comps, but it's there. And your head chef's an asshole who drives away good people because you're not there to see it." He'd looked at me for a long moment. "Fix it." "I'm not a—" "You're someone who understands how restaurants actually work, who knows the difference between power that commands and power that earns loyalty. So fix it." He'd meant it as a test, probably. See if the chemistry degree waitress could handle real responsibility. Instead, I'd found something I was good at. I fired the manager at Convergence on a Tuesday. Walked in with Miller at my back, Sadowski's implicit authority made visible, and laid out the evidence of theft with the precision of someone presenting a chemistry proof. He'd blustered, threatened lawyers, started to reach for his phone. Miller had shifted his weight slightly, just that. The manager's hand stopped mid-motion. "You're done," I said quietly. "Security will escort you out. Your final check will be mailed minus what you stole. If you want to argue about it, Mr. Sadowski is available to discuss the matter personally." The color drained from his face. He left without another word. The head chef took longer. Not because he stole, just because he was used to running his kitchen like a fiefdom and treated his staff like subjects. I'd sat through 3 services, watching, cataloging, then called him into the office. "You're talented," I'd said. "Your food is exceptional, but you're hemorrhaging good people because you're an asshole who thinks fear and excellence are the same thing." He'd stared at me. "Who the fuck are you to—" "Someone who's watched real power work." I'd leaned back in the chair, channeling every observation I'd made of Sadowski in negotiations. "You want to be feared? Fine. But fear without loyalty is just countdown to betrayal. Your sous chef is looking for other work. Your best line cook is planning to quit. In 6 months, you'll be running this kitchen alone because no one who's actually good will tolerate you. So what? I'm fired? No. You're being given a choice." I'd met his eyes directly. "Treat your people like they're worth keeping, or I'll find someone who will. You have 2 weeks to show improvement." He'd improved. Word spread. Within a month, I'd reorganized staffing at 3 restaurants, renegotiated supplier contracts that had been quietly gouging Sadowski for years, and implemented training programs that reduced turnover by 40%. I didn't do it through intimidation. I did it by remembering what it felt like to be invisible, the waitress no one noticed, the employee whose observations didn't matter. I noticed people, listened to them, fixed the small things that made their jobs harder, and Sadowski's men, the ones who'd spent years responding to fear and force, didn't quite know what to do with someone who asked their opinions and actually implemented their suggestions. "She got Marco to smile," I overheard one of them say. Marco, who ran security at Meridian and had the personality of a concrete wall. "I've worked with him for 8 years. Didn't know his face could do that." Sadowski heard the same reports I did, watched me work with the kind of focus he usually reserved for territorial negotiations. "You're better at this than I am," he said one evening in his study, reviewing the latest financial reports. "I'm different at it," I corrected. "You built something through strength. I'm just maintaining it with something else. Humanity." He set down the reports. "You're teaching my empire how to have a conscience. That's considerably more dangerous than what I do." "Dangerous how?" "Because now they're not just afraid of disappointing me. They don't want to disappoint you." He'd smiled, but something moved behind his eyes. Loyalty built on fear is fragile. Loyalty built on respect? He'd reached across the desk, taken my hand. That's the kind that lasts. The dinner happened at Meridian on a Friday night. Not unusual. Sadowski held these gatherings monthly, a mixture of allies and rivals pretending civility while negotiating territories and truces. I'd attended 3 before, always at his side, always observing. Tonight felt different. The guest list included people I'd only heard about in briefings. Volkov, who controlled most of the port traffic. Chen, who'd expanded from Chinatown into legitimate real estate. Castellano, whose restaurant empire intersected with Sadowski's in ways that required careful management. And Brennan's replacement, a man named Reeves who'd inherited the territorial dispute along with Brennan's former holdings. The private room upstairs at Meridian was set for 20. Crystal and silver and the kind of wine that didn't appear on menus. I wore black, Sadowski's preference for these events, elegant and unmemorable. Except I was memorable now. I felt it in how conversation paused when we entered, in the way Volkov's eyes tracked me with assessment that felt like being appraised for auction. We sat at the head of the table, Sadowski to my right, Miller standing at a discreet distance behind us, the rest of his security positioned at intervals that looked casual, but weren't. Dinner progressed through courses I'd helped select, the menu from one of our restaurants prepared perfectly. Conversation flowed around territorial boundaries, profit margins, which politicians needed additional encouragement to stay cooperative. I listened more than I spoke. That was the role I'd learned, the intelligent observer who occasionally offered insights but never dominated. Then Reeves leaned forward, wineglass in hand, smile sharp as wire. "I have to say, Sadowski, I'm impressed." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Most men in your position take mistresses with more traditional credentials, models, actresses, the usual. But a waitress?" He laughed, meant to sound jovial, landing cruel. "That's almost refreshingly democratic." The table went silent. Sadowski's hand, resting on the table, went perfectly still. "Careful," he said quietly. But Reeves either didn't hear the warning or chose to ignore it. No disrespect intended. "I'm sure she's capable. Must be, to have caught your attention. Though I admit I'm curious what skills exactly—" "Stop." One word. Soft as snow falling. Lethal as winter. Reeves stopped. Sadowski stood. The movement drew every eye in the room. Then, impossibly, he turned to me and knelt. Not a crouch. Not a casual drop to one knee. A deliberate, formal kneel that put him below my eye line, that transformed the power dynamic in front of 20 people who traded in power like currency. The room forgot how to breathe. "Denise Honer," he said, voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "You walked into my life by accident. Literally." A ripple of nervous laughter, quickly suppressed. "You could have run. Should have run. Instead, you stayed. You learned this world, not to exploit it or fear it, but to understand it. You took my empire and taught it something I never could. He reached for my hand. I gave it automatically, too stunned to process what was happening. You turned chaos into loyalty. You turned my men from soldiers into people who take pride in what they do. You did in 6 weeks what I couldn't do in 20 years. You made them respect something more than fear. His thumb brushed over the scar on my wrist. That's rarer than love. That's rarer than anything I've ever built. He looked up at me, eyes dark and certain and terrifyingly vulnerable in front of an audience that could destroy him with this information. Be my wife. Not a question, but not a command either. An offer, a choice. Let me protect you not as an employee or an asset, but as family. Let me build something with you instead of just for you. Let me... I leaned forward and kissed him. Soft, brief, an answer before he could finish the question. When I pulled back, I said clearly enough for the entire table to hear, yes. The room erupted. Not in celebration. These weren't people who celebrated other people's happiness, but in a ripple of reaction that moved through hardened criminals and legitimate businessmen alike. Shock, respect, the recognition that something fundamental had just shifted. Sadowski stood, pulled me to my feet, and turned to face the table. Gentlemen, he said calmly, like he hadn't just proposed in front of the city's most dangerous power brokers. You're looking at my future wife. I trust that's clear enough for everyone? His gaze landed on Reeves. Held. Reeves had gone pale. Of course. My apologies for any... Your apologies are noted. Sadowski's voice stayed pleasant. Stayed dangerous. Make sure they're also remembered. He guided me back to my seat, his hand at the small of my back, proprietary and protective, and utterly public. The dinner resumed. Conversation slowly restarted, careful and controlled. But everything had changed. I'd entered the room as Sadowski's employee, his associate, the woman he protected. I left engaged to the most dangerous man in Boston. Later, in the car with Miller driving and the city blurring past, Sadowski took my hand. I should have asked privately, he said quietly. That was calculated, using you to make a point. What point? That you're not leverage, not a weakness to exploit. You're family, and family is protected absolutely. He looked at me. I'm sorry if that felt manipulative. I thought about Reeves's sneer, about the way the room had gone silent when Sadowski knelt, about the message he'd sent to everyone who'd thought I was just the waitress who'd gotten lucky. It was manipulative, I agreed. It was also effective, and... I squeezed his hand. I think it was real too. Both things at once. Both things at once, he echoed. That's most of what I do. I know. I leaned against his shoulder, exhausted and exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. I said yes anyway. His arm came around me, solid and warm. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret it. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. Raise your hand if you screamed when he knelt. What would you have said? Comment below. Share this. Your friends need to read this. The ring appeared 3 days after the proposal. Platinum band, single diamond that caught light like it was designed to weaponize illumination. The kind of ring that announced itself in every room, that made cashiers at the grocery store smile with assumptions about fairy tales and happy endings. I wore it because refusing felt petty, because it was beautiful, because when Sadowski slid it onto my finger in his study, no ceremony, just the two of us and morning coffee, he'd said, "This makes it real." To everyone watching. Everyone was always watching now. The engagement made headlines in the society pages of the Globe. Not front page. Sadowski's legitimate business holdings were substantial enough to warrant coverage, but vague enough to avoid uncomfortable questions about his actual empire. Local entrepreneur Paul Sadowski announces engagement. The photo they ran was from some charity gala I'd attended at his side 2 weeks prior. Me in a dress that cost more than my former annual salary, him in a tuxedo, both of us smiling the careful smiles of people who understood they were performing. The article called me a hospitality consultant. It wasn't entirely wrong. I'd spent the last month reorganizing his restaurant holdings, improving profit margins, turning businesses that hemorrhaged money into operations that actually functioned. But the title sanitized what I actually did. Walked into rooms full of men who feared Sadowski and made them believe I was worth listening to for reasons beyond his implicit threat. I was good at it. I was also starting to lose myself in it. It started small. Suggestions that felt reasonable. "Miller should drive you to Convergence," Sadowski said one morning when I mentioned taking the T. "The car's faster, more efficient. I need to pick up groceries after. The car feels excessive for... Miller can handle that, or we can have someone deliver." He'd said it casually, still reviewing contracts, not looking up. Why spend your time on errands when you've got actual work to do? He wasn't wrong, but something about it felt like threads being pulled. Small, nearly invisible, until enough accumulate and you realize you're tangled. A week later, "Skip the staff meeting at Meridian tonight. I'll handle it." I should be there. We're rolling out the new training program and they'll implement it whether you're in the room or not. You've been working 60-hour weeks. Take the night off. Concern, care, completely reasonable. Except I'd spent 3 weeks developing that program. Had built relationships with the staff that made them actually listen instead of just comply. "I want to be there," I said firmly. He'd looked up then, something unreadable crossing his face. "All right, but Miller stays close. Reeves has been making noise about territorial adjustments. I don't want you exposed if his people decide to make a point." Miller stayed close. So close, I couldn't have a private conversation with the Meridian staff without him 3 feet away, a visible reminder that I was Sadowski's fiancé first, their consultant second. The threads pulled tighter. 3 weeks into the engagement, a city councilman named Torres approached me at a gallery opening. "Miss Honer." He'd offered his hand with the practiced warmth of someone who'd built a career on appearing genuine. "Congratulations on your engagement. Paul's a lucky man." "Thank you." I'd shaken his hand, aware of Miller's shifting position nearby, aware this wasn't a casual conversation. I was hoping to discuss a community development initiative in Dorchester. Several restaurant owners are concerned about new zoning regulations, and I understand you've been consulting on hospitality industry matters. He'd smiled. "Your insights could be valuable. Perhaps we could schedule a lunch." It sounded innocent, professional. Sadowski appeared at my elbow before I could respond. "Torres." His voice was pleasant. His hand at the small of my back was not. "I didn't realize you were interested in restaurant zoning. That's new. Community outreach. Important to hear all stakeholders." Torres's smile never wavered. "Miss Honer seems uniquely positioned to offer perspective on small business concerns." She is, which is why her schedule's managed carefully. Sadowski's thumb moved in small circles against my spine. The gesture would look affectionate to observers. I felt the tension in it. "Send any proposals through my office. We'll review them together." Torres had left with polite murmurs about following up. "He wanted to use you?" Sadowski said quietly once we were alone. Get you on record supporting his initiative, then leverage your association with me to pressure other business owners. Or he genuinely wanted input on zoning regulations. He's been on Reeves's payroll for 6 months. Nothing he does is genuine. He'd turned to face me. I know you want to help people. That's one of the things He'd paused, chose different words. That's valuable. But these people see kindness as weakness. They'll exploit it. So I just say no to everything. Never have a conversation without you present. You have conversations with people I've vetted. People who won't use your compassion as leverage. The threads had pulled tight enough to feel like restraints. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd spent the morning at one of Sadowski's legitimate holdings, a community center in Roxbury that operated in the red but served neighborhoods that needed it. The director, a woman named Angela who'd worked in nonprofit management for 20 years, had shown me their after-school programs, their job training initiatives, their food bank. We're 3 months from closing, she'd said bluntly. Funding's dried up. The city grant we were counting on went to a developer with better political connections. I'd looked at the budget, saw inefficiencies that could be corrected, revenue streams that weren't being maximized, grant opportunities they'd missed because they lacked someone who understood how to navigate bureaucratic systems. I can fix this, I'd said. Give me 2 weeks. I'd gone straight to Sadowski's office, brought the budget, laid out a plan for restructuring that would keep the center operational and eventually self-sustaining. He'd listened, reviewed the numbers, then set the folder aside. No. I'd stared at him. What? It's a money pit. Always has been. I keep it running as a community goodwill gesture, but pouring more resources into it is throwing money at a structural problem. The structural problem is management, which I can fix. Angela's passionate, but she's not a financial strategist. Let me bring in someone who... Denise. He'd said it gently, firmly. This isn't how we allocate resources. The center serves a purpose as is. Making it efficient means drawing attention to its connection to my holdings. Attention I don't want. So we just let it fail? Let those programs disappear because it's strategically inconvenient? We let it operate at its current level, which is more than most people in my position would do. I'd felt something crack inside me. You mean most criminals in your position? His expression hadn't changed. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. I didn't sign up to watch you pretend to help people while actually just managing your image. You signed up to be my wife, which means understanding that every decision has strategic implications you might not see. He'd stood, crossed to where I stood rigid with frustration. I know you want to save everything, fix everything, but you can't, and trying to makes you vulnerable in ways I can't protect you from. Maybe I don't want to be protected from everything. The words came out louder than I'd intended. Maybe I want to actually do something instead of being your carefully managed asset. You're not an asset. You're, what, your conscience? Your humanity accessory? The good deed that proves you're not entirely a monster? I'd stepped back, needing distance. You proposed to me in front of 20 people and said I taught your empire to respect something more than fear. But you won't actually let me do that if it conflicts with your strategic calculations. He'd absorbed that in silence, the kind of silence that felt like a chess player reassessing the board. What do you want? He'd asked finally. I want to matter. Not as your fiancé, not as the person you're protecting, as myself. As someone whose judgment you trust enough to let me make decisions without requiring your approval first. Even when those decisions expose you to risk? Yes. I'd met his eyes directly. You can't protect me from the world if you keep me locked away from it. That's not protection. That's just a prettier cage. We'd fought for another hour, not shouting. Sadowski didn't shout, but intense, focused, the kind of conversation where every word carried weight. He'd argued that risk management was his responsibility, that I didn't fully understand the threats, that every freedom I wanted came with vulnerabilities he'd spend sleepless nights covering. I'd argued that I'd proven myself capable, that I'd survived the warehouse, that treating me like fragile cargo instead of a partner meant our marriage would be him making decisions and me resenting them. I spent 3 years invisible, I'd said finally, exhausted. Serving people who didn't remember my name, you made me visible, made me matter. But now you're trying to control exactly how and where and when I'm visible, and that's just... it's another kind of invisibility. He'd stood at the window overlooking the harbor, silent for a long moment. I watched you tied to a chair, he'd said quietly. Watched them hurt you. Got there fast enough to kill them, but not fast enough to prevent it. That's what I see when you talk about freedom. The 30 seconds where I was too late. I'd crossed to him, taken his hand. I see that too. Every time someone walks too close, every time a car slows down near me. I'd squeezed his fingers, but I can't live my life afraid of those 30 seconds. And you can't build our marriage around preventing something that might never happen again. It will happen again. That's the reality of my world. Then teach me to handle it. Give me the tools instead of the cage. Make me your partner instead of your responsibility. He'd looked at our joined hands, at the ring on my finger that announced my belonging to him. If I do this, he'd said slowly, if I give you the freedom you're asking for, you have to promise me something. What? That you'll learn when to use it and when to trust my judgment. That you'll understand the difference between independence and recklessness. His eyes found mine. That you won't mistake my caution for controlling you when it's just me trying not to fail you again. I promise to try, if you promise to trust that I can think for myself. I do trust that. He'd pulled me closer, rested his forehead against mine. I'm not good at this, at caring about someone more than the strategic value they represent, at wanting to give you everything while terrified that everything will get you killed. Then be bad at it with me. We'll figure it out together. He'd kissed me then, soft and desperate and feeling more honest than any conversation we'd had. All right, he'd said against my lips. Save the community center. But take Miller and let me vet the people you bring in to help. Deal. And Denise? He'd pulled back enough to meet my eyes. Thank you for not letting me turn you into something easier to protect. I saved the community center, brought in a financial manager Sadowski vetted, restructured their programs, landed 3 new grants by the end of the month. Angela cried when the funding came through. You didn't have to do this, she'd said. Yeah, I'd answered. I did. Because I was learning that being Paul Sadowski's fiancé meant navigating the space between his protection and my agency, between his world and my values. It meant being both things at once, just like him. Like if you're proud of her growth, who's right? Comment Denise if she deserves more freedom. Comment Sadowski if he's just protecting her. I married Paul Sadowski on a Saturday in March, 6 months after I kissed him by accident. Small ceremony, 20 guests. The judge was someone Sadowski had known for years, known in the way that meant favors traded and secrets kept. We exchanged vows in his study overlooking the harbor, with Miller as a witness and my mother on video call from Vermont because her health wouldn't allow travel, but her voice breaking with happiness came through clearly enough. "You look beautiful, Dennis," she'd whispered. "Your father would have been so proud." I'd worn cream silk. Sadowski wore charcoal. We promised forever in front of people who understood exactly what forever meant in his world. Constant vigilance, permanent consequences, love fortified by violence when necessary. The ring he slid onto my finger matched the engagement band. Platinum and diamonds that caught light like promises. When the judge pronounced us married, Sadowski kissed me like we were alone. Like the audience didn't matter, like nothing existed except the two of us and the choice we'd just made. "Mrs. Sadowski," he'd murmured against my lips. I'd smiled. "That's going to take some getting used to. You have the rest of your life." 5 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Le Couronne and felt the symmetry of it. The restaurant had changed hands 3 times since I'd left, each owner trying to maintain the prestige while cutting costs, until the place I'd worked for 3 years became a shadow of itself. Reservations dropped. Staff turnover accelerated. The Michelin star they'd been chasing became a distant dream. Sadowski bought it in April. Didn't ask me first. Just came home one evening and set the deed on the kitchen counter like it was takeout. "What is this?" I'd asked. "An anniversary present. 3 months early." He'd poured wine, casual as discussing weather. "You turned my restaurants profitable. Figured you'd want one that's actually yours." "Ours," I'd corrected. "Legally mine, practically yours. I don't have time to run a restaurant. You, apparently, are exceptional at it." He hadn't been wrong. I'd gutted the place. Not literally, the bones were still good, the location still prime. But I'd stripped away the fear-based management, the cost-cutting that sacrificed quality, the hierarchies that treated staff as expendable. Rehired Antoine, who'd been let go in the second ownership change. Promoted him to general manager with a salary that made him cry. "You sure about this?" he'd asked, staring at the contract. "You've worked restaurants for 30 years. You know what good service looks like. I need someone who'll build a team, not just manage bodies." He'd built a team, hired people who'd been invisible in other kitchens, who'd been overlooked for promotions, who understood that dignity and professionalism weren't mutually exclusive. Within 3 months, we'd turned it around. Within 5, we had a waiting list, and every single person who worked there knew exactly who owned it, who I'd married, what world I moved through when I left each night. They called me Mrs. Sadowski to my face and Dennis behind my back. I'd heard it through the kitchen doors and smiled. The nickname felt like proof I hadn't lost myself entirely, that I could be both the waitress who'd carried trays and the woman who now signed their paychecks. Saturday evening, 6 p.m., I walked through Le Couronne with the same attention to detail I'd learned years ago. Table settings, aligned, polished, perfect. Lighting, warm enough to soften conversation, bright enough to showcase the food. Staff, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who took pride in their work, not just fear of consequences. I paused by table 12. Always table 12. We'd kept the numbering system from before, but I'd had it moved, no longer against the back wall in shadows, but center room, positioned to overlook everything. The best table, the one we kept permanently reserved. "Evening, Mrs. Sadowski." Caroline, one of our new servers, appeared at my elbow. 22, working her way through hospitality management courses at Northeastern, sharp enough that I'd already mentally marked her for promotion. "Everything looks ready." "It does. You did well with the training yesterday. Marcus said you handled the difficult customer perfectly." She'd flushed with pride. Just remembered what you said. Dignity for them, dignity for us. Found the middle ground. That's exactly right. I'd squeezed her shoulder. Keep that up and you'll be running this place someday. After she left, I stood alone in the dining room and felt the weight of the journey. From invisible waitress to owner. From anonymous to dangerously visible. From the girl who'd apologized for spilling drinks to the woman who trained others to command respect without demanding fear. The door opened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. I'd learned to recognize Sadowski's presence the way you recognize a shift in air pressure. You're early, I said. I'm exactly on time. He crossed to me, pressed a kiss to my temple. You said 7. I arrived at 6:30 to watch you work. There's a difference. How long have you been watching? Long enough to see you turn that server into someone who'll defend this restaurant like it's hers. He turned me to face him. You're doing it again. Building loyalty that has nothing to do with fear. It's just good management. It's alchemy. He brushed hair from my face, turning my world into something that doesn't require constant threat of violence to function. Your world still requires plenty of violence. I just manage the parts that don't. And thank God for that. He glanced at table 12. Shall we? We'd made it a ritual. Once a month, we dined at Le Couronne like regular customers. He'd order wine I'd selected. I'd let the staff serve us without interfering. We'd sit at table 12 and pretend, for 2 hours, that we were just a couple enjoying dinner. Tonight, Antoine himself brought the first course. Seared scallops with citrus reduction, the same dish I'd been carrying the night I'd kissed Sadowski. A small joke. A callback. Deliberate choice? Sadowski asked after Antoine retreated. Maybe. I took a bite, tasted summer and salt and memory. Seemed fitting. Fitting how? This is where it started. Where I crashed into you and accidentally changed my entire life. I set down my fork. Felt right to come full circle. He studied me across the table. Regrets. I considered that. Thought about the warehouse, the zip ties, the sound of gunfire. Thought about arguments over autonomy and freedom. Thought about learning to sleep next to a man who kept a gun in the nightstand and contacts in his phone that led to people who solved problems permanently. No, I said finally. It's not the life I planned, but it's the one I chose. There's a difference. There is. He reached across the table, took my hand. His thumb found the scars on my wrist automatically, traced them. I still see these and want to resurrect Brennan just to kill him again. Brennan's gone. His organization's gone. Reeves learned his lesson. I turned my hand over, laced our fingers together. You can't protect me from everything that already happened. I can try. I know. That's why it works. Dinner progressed through courses I'd designed personally. Duck breast, seasonal vegetables, a wine pairing Sadowski had acquired through channels I'd learned not to examine too closely. Between the main course and dessert, Miller appeared. Quiet word in Sadowski's ear. I watched my husband's expression shift, the shutters coming down, the calculation replacing warmth. What? I asked. Territory dispute in Southie. Chen's people and someone new trying to establish operations. He set down his napkin. Nothing urgent, but it needs addressing. A year ago he would have left immediately, would have handled it personally, leaving me to finish dinner alone. Instead, he pulled out his phone, typed something, set it aside. Marco can handle the initial conversation, he said. I'll follow up tomorrow. You sure? I'm having dinner with my wife. That takes priority. He picked up his wine glass, took a slow sip. I'm learning, slowly, but learning. I smiled. Yeah. You are? The moment felt fragile, precious. A man who'd built an empire on immediate violent response was choosing to wait because I mattered more than territory. It wouldn't last forever. Tomorrow he'd handle Chen's situation. Next week there'd be another crisis. This world, his world, our world, didn't allow for permanent peace. But it allowed for moments, for Saturday dinners, for choosing love over strategy, at least, temporarily. It was enough. We finished dinner, declined dessert. Sadowski had something planned at home, he said, which meant either actual dessert or the kind of evening that didn't require food. I walked through the restaurant one final time before leaving, checked in with Antoine, everything running smoothly, confirmed tomorrow's reservation list, reminded Caroline about her training shift on Tuesday. Being an owner felt different than being staff, but the fundamentals were the same: attention to detail, respect for people, understanding that excellence came from caring about what you did. I'd learned that carrying trays at minimum wage. I practiced it now running a restaurant that bore my husband's name and my values. Outside, Miller waited with the car. The November air was sharp, promising winter. Sadowski helped me into my coat, small gesture, automatically protective. Thank you, I said. For what? For buying me a restaurant. For letting me run it my way. For not trying to control every detail. I'm controlling some details. Miller's staying until closing. The security system cost more than the kitchen renovation. I personally vetted every staff member. I know. That's the other thing I'm thanking you for. I turned to face him on the sidewalk, for understanding the difference between protection and prison. Still learning that one too. He pulled me close, kissed me properly despite Miller's presence and the pedestrians walking past. But you're a good teacher. In the car heading home, not my old apartment, not even the penthouse, but the North Shore house that had somehow become ours, I watched the city blur past and thought about trajectory. One clumsy kiss had built an empire's conscience. One accident had rewritten 2 lives. I'd walked into Le Couronne 3 years ago, broke and desperate and invisible. Tonight I'd walked out as an owner, a wife, someone who moved through power without being consumed by it. The journey between those 2 points had cost me anonymity, safety, the comfortable invisibility of being overlooked. It had given me purpose, partnership, a life that felt lived instead of endured. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother. How was dinner at the restaurant? I typed back. Perfect. Everything's perfect. Not entirely true. Perfect implied security we'd never have, peace that couldn't exist in Sadowski's world. But true enough. True in the ways that mattered. Sadowski's hand found mine in the darkness of the car, squeezed gently. What are you thinking about? He asked. That I kissed you before I knew your name, I said quietly. And every day since, I've learned what it costs to keep loving you. Is it worth it? I looked at him, this man who'd killed for me, fought with me, learned to trust me with freedoms that terrified him, who'd bought me a restaurant and let me reshape parts of his empire, who chose dinner with me over territory disputes, who was exactly what everyone said, violent, ruthless, dangerous, and also mine. Every day, I said. It's worth it every day. He kissed my knuckles. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Yeah, I smiled against the darkness, against the fragile peace we'd built. I really am. The car drove north, toward home, toward whatever came next, and I watched the city lights fade behind us, content with the choice I'd made. The waitress who'd tripped into a mafia boss had found her equilibrium, one clumsy kiss at a time. Did you survive this emotional roller coaster? Comment your favorite moment from the entire story. Like if you love Denise and Sadowski's journey share with someone who loves dark romance, follow for more stories like this. Rate this story. How many stars? 1-5. Thank you for reading. Your support means everything.